Yes, 71.12%.
In 1998, after more than 30 years of bitter and bloody conflict, a peace agreement was signed in Northern Ireland. David Trimble, leader of the Ulster Unionists, and John Hume of the nationalist SDLP won the Nobel Peace Prize for their work in the Good Friday Agreement. It was a dream for many, but not for everyone. Ian Paisley was still saying no.
We want the agreement to fall. We don't want the agreement to be carried forward to its climax. And what is the climax of the agreement? An all-Ireland Republic. Exactly. That's what we're after, to destroy the conspiracy.
Paisley seemed a man out of step, but he would go on to make a comeback of Old Testament proportions, taking him to the heart of power in Northern Ireland. The Good Friday Agreement was remarkable.
Brilliant, brilliant altogether.
Masterminded by the British and Irish leaders, Tony Blair and Bertie Ahern.
There was a plea for peace by people. They wanted to move forward. It was to try and bring in the extremes, bring in the people who were causing the problems and the fighting. And there were big issues. It wasn't easy.
It was celebrated around the world.
We therefore congratulate especially Prime Minister Tony Blair and the Irish Prime Minister for the beautiful initiative that they've taken.
The agreement that has emerged from the Northern Ireland peace talks opens the way for the people there to build a society based on enduring peace, justice, and equality.
Creating a new devolved government, nationalists and unionists had agreed to share power in Northern Ireland. In a country embracing its newfound peace, Ian Paisley and his endless opposition seemed to have hit the wrong note.
Good. Hello, dear. How are you? You're not going to speak to me?
How you doing?
Well, I'm doing well. Doing well.
At a press conference in Ballymoney Town Hall, the turnout was not perhaps what he would have liked.
There is an element where he wants to be at the centre of things. He was not a bit player. That was a big moment for him, huge moment.
The DUP used to joke that the party's name meant don't underestimate Paisley. He's older, not as active as he was, and is losing foot soldiers.
I mean, DUP is basically a busted flush now, isn't it?
Even those who once supported him wondered if, now in his 70s, this was the end for the preacher and politician.
He's not the man, or he's not the party that he used to be.
In the early 80s, I was his PA. I remember Ian Paisley saying to me, "Jim, when I get to 65, I'm retiring because I've seen too many old men make fools of themselves."
So you want tea?
Yep.
No, just sit down there. I want you to sit.
I think Ian Paisley had a sense of his own significance, of almost being predestined to be the man who spoke for Ulster.
Ian Paisley was someone who never saw defeat. He never saw obstacles, he saw opportunities.
What age was Mr. Churchill when he took on the colossal task of defeating fascism and Nazism? Think of their ages and just give a little credit that Ulster people, bred on porridge of the shorter catechism, are strong in body, soul and mind.
Paisley had a sense of destiny, but in Peter Robinson, he had a tactician who could turn that destiny into reality.
One of the greatest double act in political history was Ian Paisley and Peter Robinson, because you had the cold, clinical analysis of Peter Robinson, and then you had the dogged determination of this larger-than-life individual in Ian Paisley.
Peter Robinson, he could play chess in politics to 5 or 6 moves ahead, where most people could only play 1 or 2 moves ahead.
Robinson believed he had a strategy to make Paisley a leading voice of unionism once again. But to do so, they first had to take their seats in the power-sharing assembly and confront their Republican enemies, Sinn Féin's Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, a former IRA commander.
Mr. Adams talked, let us think of people. I'm thinking today of the people, of those that were murdered by his cohorts, the families that were smashed, the people that were rent in sorrow. I'm thinking of vegetables, people turned into vegetables by IRA violence today. That's who I'm thinking of.
As Paisley berated Sinn Féin in Parliament, Robinson's strategic target was First Minister and leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, David Trimble.
I think Mr. Trimble has put himself in a difficult position. He's made pledges which he knows he won't honour. He knew what he signed up to when he signed the agreement. He signed up to sitting down in government with Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness. And that's what eventually, I think, will cause his downfall.
David was under siege. He was under constant attack from Ian. So it was tough and a very traumatic period.
David Trimble intellectually signed up for all of this, but emotionally found it difficult at times. Not least because he was beset by the DUP, beating up on him continuously, sometimes in quite a nakedly aggressive. You know, the famous scene where he was assaulted trying to get out of the building. Trimble was under too much pressure.
Dublin is sick. Hear, hear. Mr. Tony Blair is sick. His lies has caught on him, and the sickest man of all is David Trimble.
He made absolutely certain that the Ulster Unionists were unable to deliver because he kept whipping up the fears of the people about what Good Friday Agreement was and what it was going to do to them, and it was trundling them into a united Ireland. He made sure that it didn't work.
Joining me now is the DUP leader, Ian Paisley.
I think that the country we have now is a disgrace. Who do we have in the streets of this country? Those who have done the worst murders of the 20th century. Those who should be still behind bars. And where are they? They're released. That's what we have. Let's make no mistake about it. This matter is not over. As Mr. Churchill said, appease the crocodiles, but at the end of the day, they'll swallow you.
He went along with his job, which was to slowly wean votes away from the more moderate Unionist Party, and he did it again and again by pointing to the fact that they were soft on security, they were soft on the IRA, and he was the only one who could be trusted not to give in either to the IRA or to a Dublin government.
Good evening. The Northern Ireland peace process is on a knife edge tonight after police took the unprecedented step of raiding Sinn Féin's offices at Stormont.
As relations in the Assembly strained, one scandal was enough to bring the whole thing down.
They were investigating allegations about a Republican spying operation that said to have penetrated the office of the Secretary of State and copied sensitive communications with Downing Street. There's growing unionist pressure to expel Sinn Féin from the power-sharing executive.
Stormont was rocked by reports of an IRA spy ring, providing Paisley and the DUP the opportunity to declare Sinn Féin as unfit for government.
The inevitable crisis that many people have been waiting for the last 3 years This was bound to happen at some stage.
As police storm Stormont in search of evidence, is this just a Belfast version of the political silly season, or is the Good Friday Agreement ready for the last rites?
In protest, the DUP's ministers resigned.
We may only be two ministers who are opposed to this process and who refuse to be a part of an executive which has the representatives of Sinn Féin IRA.
We have said we are out to all intents and purposes now. Mr. Trimble, it's over to you.
David Trimble had no apparent option than to collapse the executive, forcing an assembly election. For Paisley and Robinson, everything was going to plan.
What Paisley wanted was to be in power. And as long as the DUP were not the biggest party and the biggest unionist party in Northern Ireland, he was never going to get power.
The DUP is pinning its hopes on coming out on top in this election. Its manifesto promises a fair deal and a return to devolution on more favourable terms.
This election is Ulster's date with destiny. It is a chance to put things right and to negotiate a new agreement.
The DUP have their very own battle bus.
See that? That's lead for victory, 1, 2, 3, DUP.
Its design and number plate is reputed to have cost around £400.
Confident in Robinson's strategy, the DUP went into the election intending to overtake the Ulster Unionists as the biggest unionist party.
Hello, lad. How you doing, boy? You know what I do on the 26th? Good. He just saw, we're going to win. This is going to be a tremendous election. He was the eternal optimist.
Know what to do for us on election day? Put the mark in the right place.
Thank you very much.
That's right. And here, would you give us a wee trim there?
Alongside his father in the campaign trail was youngest son Ian Paisley Jr., seeking his own seat in the Assembly.
Yes. Did she? Yes. You're a first-time voter. And who are you going to vote for?
I've grown up with Ian. He is a different character to his father.
Good for you, well done.
It's the best vote you've ever cast this time.
That's right, and start a good habit. Instead of all them bad ones you have. All right. See you, thank you.
Bye.
The hope was that Ian Jr. would one day continue his father's legacy and lead the DUP.
Whenever you're 18, who are you going to vote for? Good lad. Hey?
I think it's unfair to ask that Ian becomes just a clone of his father, because Ian Paisley was unique.
With Paisley's years of experience, he knew how to fight a populist campaign, appeal to the grassroots, and exasperate your rivals.
I've made do with the monkeys while the organ grinder is elsewhere. Now I want to have a proper debate with leadership level. So I challenge Dr. Paisley. Come and debate. Find out just what your position actually is with regard to being in government with Sinn Féin.
Dr. Paisley, somebody's come to see you.
Rather than engage in debate, Paisley ignored David Trimble.
When are we going to have the debate? When are you going to stop running away? I'm not a monkey. Where's the organ grinder? Come on. Who's going to have the debate? Who's running away from debate?
There wasn't actually much in the way of reasonable argument. It was never about policy.
Run away, Trimble! You ran away from Doug, and he's hiding from you.
You had to keep your temper.
The DUP are saying no again. Again, they're saying no.
It was ghastly to see unionism brawling in the street like that. That was a setup, I think.
As the DUP and Ulster Unionists fought each other every step of the way.
You are a traitor. You have done bad.
Public attitudes were shifting to the political extremes, at the expense of the middle ground.
Gerry Adams was asked if he would like to watch an Ian Paisley-David Trimble debate.
Well, you know, there's more exciting things to be watching and to be doing. It's hard for the DUP to get out of the habit of saying no, but other than that, I mean, what we're about is, in terms of unionism, is actually appealing to unionists. And this might seem a sort of a quantum leap. To consider voting for Republican.
Hello there.
The day of the count, I was as nervous as could be. When the Paisley arrived, I was walking up and down behind him. He said, "Would you sit down? You're making me nervous." He said, "You're walking about there like an expectant father." He was a man of God. He believed in divine providence. Nothing happened by chance.
After nearly 48 hours of counting, it's now official that the leader of the biggest political party in Northern Ireland is tonight the Reverend Ian Paisley.
Over 30 years after creating his own political party, Ian Paisley was finally in the driving seat of Northern Irish politics. And planning for his succession was underway, with Ian Jr. also winning a seat.
Today there's been a nail hammered hard into the coffin of the Belfast Agreement in this election. The DUP is unstoppable.
No longer was the DUP just the party of second preference. It was now the party of first choice, and it was growing, and the momentum was there.
Ian had mocked up pretty well everybody else, so he became leader of unionism. That was a big deal for David.
Trimble was dealt another blow, as several party members, including Geoffrey Donaldson and Arlene Foster, future leaders of the DUP, defected to Paisley's team.
We were all really core supporters of David Trimble. We wanted him to succeed. But we hoped to advocate for unionism in a stronger way than we felt was being done in the Ulster Unionist Party. It was a huge wrench for all of us, I have to say.
But Paisley's nemesis, Sinn Féin, had become the largest nationalist party. If there was ever to be a return to power sharing in Northern Ireland, it required Paisley's cooperation with his Republican enemies.
We will not have armed IRA Sinn Féin in any government of Northern Ireland. We'll not discuss it, we'll not debate it, we'll not chat about it. You're out! You put yourselves out! And until you are prepared to repent and bring forth fruits meet for repentance, there will be no dialogue with you.
Or it seems pretty clear that the new assembly here in Northern Ireland is going to be totally unworkable.
He was saying Sinn Féin were not fit for government, could never be in government, and he wouldn't be in government with them.
Do you accept that Sinn Féin is now the authentic voice of the nationalist community in Northern Ireland?
Well, let's make one thing absolutely clear. Sinn Féin is, as the Prime Minister said, the opposite side of the Provisional IRA.
Do you accept that the voters of Northern Ireland have endorsed that party and that therefore you have to work with them?
I mean, Adolf Hitler achieved a mandate. That didn't make him a nice person or a respectable person or even a Democrat.
This is a battle to the death until the blood-soaked murderous beast of Republican terrorism and all other terrors is put forever into the cage of destruction and death. There is no peaceful future for us.
He took that position of the leadership of the people in the north of unionist, loyalist tradition who were not prepared to compromise.
Ian Paisley was now in a position of tremendous power, but he was faced with the biggest dilemma of his political life. What would he do about the future of power sharing? Could he keep saying no to the majority of people in Northern Ireland and the British and Irish governments?
Just when you think you've reached the peak, you see you've got another mound.
that's still to go?
I think the Prime Minister felt suspicion of a figure like Ian Paisley, who had been such a destructive figure in Northern Ireland politics.
It may be Christmas, but this was not the gift Tony Blair wanted from Northern Ireland.
Tony Blair put a lot of value on personal relationships, no matter who he was dealing with. What helped, I think, in those meetings, at least the initial ones, that they did have a very different view of religion, but a shared interest in religion.
I remember him telling party officers one day, Tony Blair has asked me for a Bible, you know. I remember saying to him, Ian, do you think the Prime Minister wouldn't have a Bible? Do you think he's playing you to get you on side? Not at all, not at all.
After a lifetime of trenchant opposition, could Paisley bring pragmatism to his politics?
And after a one-hour meeting, this uncompromising message ahead of talks in the new year.
There'll never be any conditions when we will sit in government with any body of people, whether they be loyalist or whether they be nationalist or Republican, who have an army, and that army is being used against democracy and against the very principles of peace.
Prospect of having to share power with Sinn Féin was not an easy one. We had to find ways to ensure that they had actually left violence behind.
For Peter Robinson, if they were to maintain the advantage over their unionist rivals, the next step was clear.
We're not in the business of planning for failure. We're planning for success. We have proposals. We have a positive and constructive agenda. We're wanting to work with the government. That's what we intend to do.
Peter Robinson was considered the more moderate voice because intellectually he would have seen that there was really no alternative to deal with Sinn Féin. But this was doing a deal with those who've been responsible for killing friends, relatives, members of the party. But in the end, there was only one view that mattered, and that would have been Ian Paisley.
Peter Robinson needed Ian Paisley, but I don't think there ever was total trust one of the other. I think there were frustrations one with the other.
The IRA needs to be humiliated, and they need to wear their sackcloth and ashes not in a back room, but openly. And we have no apology for the stand we're taking.
Myself and Martin McGuinness formed an opinion that this couldn't be sustained. Was there any possibility of trying to get Ian Paisley to come across the Rubicon? We developed a sort of informal means of dialogue with the DUP. And we had the view that the DUP at least was moving slightly.
Times were changing as another obstinate force in Northern Ireland made a significant concession.
Gerry Adams said to me, you know, we're getting older. We don't want our grandchildren to go through what we had to go through. They were keen to do the deal.
The news headlines this Thursday lunchtime. The IRA has ordered an end to its campaign of violence.
Pledging to dump their weapons, the IRA made a definitive move towards peace.
Unfortunately, there's a time for war. There's also a time to engage, to reach out, to put war behind us all. This is that time.
The armed struggle is over, and yet your party has been underwhelmed. Why?
The words don't matter. Listen to the words you've just had thrown at you tonight. Look at the words in the statement. Completely meaningless.
Ian Paisley Jr. clearly cared for his father not being put in a position where he was seen to compromise too much or be compromised. And I suspect that he was heavily conflicted.
When it says that it will commit its volunteers to democratic and peaceful means and forbid them to be involved in any other activity whatsoever, what part of any activity whatsoever, do the leaders not understand?
Just make your mind up time. And, you know, he could either make his mind up and decide to go for it, or more likely, because, you know, it is hard going back to what we have, we hold, and then smash Sinn Féin, you know.
With the Republican commitment for peace, the British and Irish leaders, Blair and Ahern, sensed their final opportunity to salvage the 1998 agreement. Talks were teed up for St Andrews in Scotland.
Talks like these are always called hothouse negotiations. Outside, though, it was anything but. Gerry Adams, Ian Paisley are being asked to do things they've never done before.
The key in this kind of conflict resolution is to get everybody together and, in a sense, to throw the key away of the building until there's been some progress.
Now's the time to get the business done and completed. And we know the issues we've got to resolve in terms of power sharing, in terms of policing. All those things are well gone over. The ground's been gone over many, many times. Thanks, Ollie.
As the eyes of the world looked on, Ian Paisley wrestled with his dilemma: reach a compromise and become First Minister of Northern Ireland, or say no, risking the country's future.
We have nothing to deliver because all the other parties agree with democracy and agree that we have to build what we're going to build on a firm democratic foundation.
You've said no all your political life. To then say yes, to share power with the deepest, bitterest enemies is a very hard thing to do.
There was no plan B. We were at deadlock. We had to say to the parties, either you move overnight, or by the morning we've got the helicopters in standby and we're out of here. No deal.
Peter Robinson always identified the fact that to do any sort of progress, it had to have Ian Paisley's stamp on it. He couldn't do it.
With time running out, Paisley looked to those he trusted the most.
Peter would have provided political analysis, whereas Eileen would have been there to support him. I'm sure they would have prayed together about it.
Don't underestimate Baroness Paisley. Very formidable person. It was very evident how powerful Eileen was in the Paisley dynasty, but also in her influence over Ian.
He took counsel and put quite a bit of store by her views and things. She was encouraging him going into government with Sinn Féin.
Ian Paisley had begun to mentally put himself in the position of what it would feel like to be First Minister. And once you begin, if you like, to try on that coat, you begin to think, well, what actually would it take for me to have it permanently?
But he still had that sense of God's purpose and God's plan. God will give us the outcome.
Today, we stand at a crossroads. We stand at a place where there is a road to democracy and there is a road to anarchy. And I trust that we will see in the coming days the vast majority of people taking to the road of democracy. We will meet the requirements, but the Irish Sinn Féin has got to meet those requirements. And when they do, then we will really be in the way to peace for our people and a good future for every child born in Northern Ireland.
Ian Paisley wanted to do business. He had turned from Dr. No into somebody who might be prepared to say yes.
We were away from everything was no. I mean, those days were gone. If you weren't going to move, you were going to get marginalised.
But if he did move, would his supporters follow?
There were those in the DUP delegation at St Andrews who were deeply unhappy at the direction that Ian Paisley was taking them. Ian Paisley was prepared to cross the Rubicon. That didn't necessarily mean that his party was prepared to follow him.
I certainly would describe myself as in tune with many of the traditional Paisley values. I probably feared that things were moving, in my terms, in the wrong direction.
There were other more cautious voices within the DUP who argued that he was in danger of leaving his party and the church behind him.
I had an ear to the ground. It was floated. Possibility of power sharing. Dr. Paisley had said in August of that year, over his dead body, power sharing with Sinn Féin would ever come about.
The parties left without a definitive deal, but an agreed deadline for a decision on power sharing.
Great end of St Andrews Agreement was it was his wedding anniversary. So we had got a woodsmith to carve a bowl, an oak tree that had fallen in the Battle of the Mines site. At the end of the meeting, I presented the bowl.
And the Battle of the Boyne, of course, is a very important part of Orange history and Unionist culture and so on. And Ian Paisley was deeply touched by this. And you know, in the end, all politics is personal. And there was that little bit of chemistry broke the ice.
It was a great gesture by us. It wasn't my idea. Tony Blair was giving me a book or something like that. And Tony Blair wanted it to be a joint presentation, but we wouldn't agree.
The people in this room sense betrayal. For Ian Paisley to even think of sharing power with Sinn Féin is enough.
I cannot convey to you how sick in the pit of my stomach I feel each time I realise the magnitude of that betrayal.
Paisley faced the wrath of the hardline Unionists, those prepared to take drastic measures to prevent an agreement.
The Army has defused up to 8 explosive devices found at the Northern Ireland Assembly. A debate on power sharing was suspended when the Loyalist paramilitary burst in, claiming he had a bomb.
Notorious Loyalist killer Michael Stone forces his way into Stormont with a gun.
No surrender! No shelling!
Ian Paisley was more somebody who was a follower of his flock, in the sense of always telling them what they wanted to hear. But now he had to stop being a follower and he had to start being a leader.
Ian Paisley held the view that to make the breakthrough and to work with Republicans and nationalists, the only one that could do that was himself. And I think that's true.
People really believed in him. They believed in his vision. They believed in what he was doing. And if Ian said that this was the right way to go, for a lot of them, it really meant a great deal.
As the deadline approached, Sinn Féin made clear their desire to nominate Martin McGuinness as Deputy First Minister.
I've known Martin McGuinness before he died for 30 years or so. And let's be honest, he was a very scary man at the height of the IRA campaign. Never having met, they could afford to have a view that they hated each other and that each one was the devil incarnate.
The pressure was mounting on Ian Paisley.
Ian Paisley should have the courage of his convictions and have the guts to stand up and tell the people of Northern Ireland whether he's going to share power with Sinn Féin, which I believe he is, or whether he's not.
I was in Dublin. Blair phoned me. Martin McGuinness was on his way to Dublin. And I said, Martin, it's a game on.
Almost 6 months after St Andrews, there was a breakthrough. the DUP were prepared to share power with their arch-enemies, Sinn Féin. But before it could be announced, there was one final battle.
While neither the DUP nor Sinn Féin were backing away from sitting together to show the formation of the executive, they were arguing over the shape of the table. Sinn Féin wanted the parties to sit alongside each other at a single table to show partnership. For the DUP, this was just too much.
Question. What do Northern Irish politicians do when they see light at the end of the tunnel? Answer, they order more tunnel.
We had to present a magic moment. People turning on their televisions needed to know something had changed. It wasn't more of the same that we'd seen for the last numbers of years. There was something dramatic had happened.
The geniuses at the Lord Land Office had designed a diamond-shaped table where, yes, they could sit opposite each other as well as appear to be alongside each other. The final hurdle had been crossed.
They say seeing is believing, and it was never more true. This really is Gerry Adams, and this really is Ian Paisley, sitting side by side at a table corner.
The DUP executive overwhelmingly endorsed a motion committing our party to support and participate fully in government in May of this year. This is a binding resolution.
I was sitting just behind Dr. Paisley. It's sometimes surreal when you're sitting in that sort of a moment, as it were. It's almost if you're watching yourself on television. I think for all of us on the unionist side, we had mixed emotions. It was going to herald the beginning of a new phase.
I have to say, from that moment, I always found Ian Paisley good-humoured, respectful, positive, trying his best.
Ian Paisley was sworn in as First Minister, with Martin McGuinness as Deputy First Minister.
This was Northern Ireland on parade. This was us showing the world that actually we've got a whole bunch of new artists. We're putting the band back together and we can do this.
If those same people had only allowed the Ulster people to settle the matter without their interference and insistence upon their way and their way alone, we would all have come to this day a lot earlier.
Thank you.
And you take a middle seat.
It was like flicking a switch when he became First Minister.
Well, I wonder why people hate me, because I'm such a nice man.
There was a guy who was a leading member of the Provisional IRA, and Ian Paisley, who brought hundreds of thousands of people onto the street, saying no surrender, you know, no progress, no to everything from A to a Z. And here we're all agreeing to make progress, so it was kind of funny.
He was only squatting.
I thought there'd be edginess in the relationship between Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness, and instead what we found were two giggling schoolboys laughing together at the joke that they were going to play on the unsuspecting media and the rest of the world by appearing together.
They just seemed to be in fits of laughter every time we went somewhere.
Dubbed the Chuckle Brothers, public opinion for the unlikely pair appeared to soar.
No change.
Very good.
Not an inch and no surrender.
It's my personal opinion that Paisley regarded Martin McGuinness, after a while, it was almost like, in biblical terms, like the prodigal son, that he had returned, and that he was going to, slaughter the fatted calf for him.
Martin McGuinness is very kind of hard negotiator and hard politically, but he didn't have a big ego. Martin McGuinness almost deferred to Ian Paisley as the senior figure, as the First Minister, and he was the Deputy. But don't misinterpret that as being in any way a policy concession or a political concession. It was a human concession, and it was key to their chemistry.
As part of the agreement, both First Minister and Deputy First Minister had equal power in government.
And international journalists were always wanting to know who was in charge. And I would say, well, Martin McGuinness is the Deputy First Minister, but he is not Ian Paisley's deputy. Martin McGuinness never really made much of a fuss about that, even though the power that he had was identical to that of Ian Paisley.
But some of Ian Paisley's hardline following were struggling to accept the partnership.
Ian Paisley had a remarkable capacity not to see what he didn't want to see. I remember challenging him and saying, Ian, you're not going to be Prime Minister. You're going to be joint First Minister with an IRA commander, and you won't even be able to sign a letter unless he co-signs it. And with the usual rumbustious response was, not at all, I'll be in charge.
Not an inch. So the view that Dr. Paisley was going to dominate this setup and dictate the course of the power shed suddenly came to an end, and it was realised that the enemy is in and it has equal power.
Jim, are you happy with the way things are going?
I realised now time in the DUP was limited, and it ended the day they sat down with IRA Sinn Féin.
I fully understand why folks like Jim Allister could feel betrayed, but there's a need to recognise change. We can't bury our heads in the sand. We have got to recognise that Sinn Féin have a massive mandate. They have a legitimate right to play a part. I think it was the right move to make.
I believe he betrayed what he had stood for throughout all his years previous to that. He did a U-turn.
Your one-time close friend Ivan Foster had spoken out against the line you're taking
Well,
on the St Andrews Agreement.
You can say one-time close friend because I mean he left the DUP party years ago, but he's entitled to his point of view.
But are you
It's gonna be a
concerned
good
you might
thing.
have to choose between your church and your party on this?
No, I don't think so, because the vast majority of the Free Presbyterians are absolutely for me.
Ian Paisley had brought the DUP to the top table of politics, but his Free Presbyterian Church believed he'd gone too far.
The man has preached and preached and preached and preached that it's wrong for terrorists to be in government. So why is he put terrorists into government?
He believed that it would be theologically impossible to go into power with Sinn Féin, which in their terms was like going into power with the IRA. And they still believed that. He taught them that, and then he abandoned his own teaching. That's how they saw it.
For over half a century, Paisley's role as moderator of the Free Presbyterian Church had been undisputed.
Was it hard for Nathan, the prophet, to go to his friend David and tell him that he had done wrong and sinned? It was. But Nathan had to do what God told him. He had to do what was right, no matter how much I admired and loved Ian Paisley.
But at a meeting of the church elders, a group of rebels staged an intervention. Paisley was issued with an ultimatum: cede control of the church that he founded, or resign from the top job in politics.
What you're doing and what the First Minister is required to do is in conflict with the position of moderator of the Free Presbyterian Church. Let me just say, I learned how to fight at your feet. So there's nobody to blame but yourself. And I smiled as I said that, and he laughed back at me.
See there to be a sense of disunity because of him. It must have caused him great sorrow of heart. That was not his intention. Political parties can have their political differences. That shouldn't be the case in the church.
Forced to step down from his own church, cracks were appearing in the house of Paisley.
Can I ask how you feel, Dr. Paisley?
I feel the very best, my friend. The very best.
Are you happy to see Dr. Paisley going this evening? I have no comment to make at all. What about yourself, sir? Are you happy to see him going? No comment to make. Did you have a vote last time? No comment to make.
I really don't think that Ian Paisley imagined that what he was going to do by going into government would lose him the church he founded. I think he believed that he still had that power where people would follow him. So it must have been absolutely devastating for him to realise he lost them.
As the shock took its toll on Paisley, questions were being asked of his performance as First Minister.
I was part of the executive that he chaired. Ian revelled in it, but it was also clear that his capabilities were failing.
The demands of the job, the sheer running around the country, which he'd always done, but he was now doing it as an octogenarian.
Hello, good morning.
He was getting tireder. You could see that the doc was struggling a little bit.
There was never any suggestion that Doc wasn't the leader, but behind the scenes, a lot of the burden of the work fell on Peter.
Well, Peter Robinson was running the place along with Martin McGuinness, and Ian Paisley was functioning more like the chairman of the board, ceremonially in place.
Just behind those four, it's Geoffrey Donaldson on the dark horse, still going quite well.
Speculation surrounding Paisley's succession was rife.
Paisley Jr. on my dad's bigger than your dad, and coming up well on the stand side there's Peter Robinson, and I can see clearly now. And
Peter Robinson saw himself as the obvious next leader of the DUP. His strategy had helped the party win double the number of seats of their closest unionist rivals and secured their place on top. But the party's success could be jeopardised by another in the Paisley dynasty.
We're the best of mates. Have been for a long time.
The recently appointed junior minister, Ian Paisley Jr.
He's a very affable character with ability, with real ability.
Ian Jr. was key for his dad, but his natural disposition is as a mischief maker. So he wasn't trusted by his own DUP group.
There were a number of occasions where discussions were going on, and one in particular where Ian Jr. said to me, well, I know that's your position, but this is what I think, and I'm going to go to Dad about that, and you know what's going to happen. That sort of stuff gets back to people like Peter Robinson very quickly. And it terrified them that there was the danger of the real decisions being taken there by Ian Jr., and there was no way they could afford to put up with that. Their view of Junior was always that he lacked personal judgment, was gauche, and would eventually get them in trouble.
Ian Paisley Jr., how they're linked in a £50 million land deal.
Mr Paisley Jr., the junior minister, lobbied another member of the executive.
More controversial headlines today, this time involving the cost of his Ballymena office.
Ian Paisley Jr. was engulfed in controversy, compromising his own position and the reputation of his father's party.
We have this situation where it's just continuing like one of these plug-in air fresheners where there's just this whiff of sleaze being injected into the air.
Rumours of my demise, as someone else said, have been greatly exaggerated. They're probably the wishes of my enemies, but I intend to stay around for a very long time. And I noticed that my father has extremely good genes, and we're not talking Levi's, and I hope that they're inherited somewhat.
There were loads of occasions where the likes of Peter Robinson would go to Ian Senior and say, your son's in bother again, we need to sort this all out. And the doc would promise, yeah, well, we'll deal with that. But he never did anything about it.
The only publicity the DUP were getting was the publicity centred around Ian. Anything which distracts from the main work of a political party, you've got to find ways of dealing with that.
It all came to grief very badly.
10 months into the job, Ian Jr. is stepping down and returning to the backbenches.
The criticism has been a distraction and has got in the way of the activities of this government, and importantly has got in the way of the activities of my political party.
With Ian Jr. off the front line, Peter Robinson moved towards the end game.
When Ian Paisley Jr. fell from grace, the crutch was gone.
I see this as the start of the demise of the Paisley Empire, and to my opinion, they brought it on themselves.
Yes, it's a wonder. The whole Ian Paisley Jr. stuff was mounting. There was a press conference, and of course, we're all getting at Ian Paisley, what was going to happen, what was he going to do.
For all of the people of Northern Ireland, we have done big business today, and if you want to sidetrack it, you can sidetrack it as much as you have done in the past. You're quite welcome to do it. I have a fairly hard rhinoceros skin, and I think I'll not be skinned by you or the likes of you.
I felt that day was very uncomfortable, that things had changed. And then I was picking up stuff behind the scenes, some were saying to me, this can't go on, this just can't go on. Those around him who had been his closest allies, Peter Robinson and others, had turned against him. He felt for the good of the DUP. Ian Paisley had really served his purpose, telling him that it was time to go. Not that he wanted to. He had no choice in the end.
Good evening. Ian Paisley, one of the most prominent political figures of the past 40 years, is to resign as First Minister of Northern Ireland and leader of the DUP.
Was it pressure from others in your party who were unhappy about the direction of your leadership?
I don't think I can be pressured. I'm too old in the hide for that. I have been up and down for many long years before you were out of nappies. And I can say to you that Ian Paisley is not easy to be pushed around.
Peter Robinson took his position as leader of the DUP and First Minister of Northern Ireland.
I think Ian didn't want to remain the outsider. He wanted ultimately to be the insider. And then the party that he created decided, we've got to move you on. And all his key lieutenants just ratted on him and left him there.
I think I also felt I wasn't used in the end.
Some would take a view that it was about almost dispensing of Dr. Paisley having done what he did, and it was allowing others then to move forward. But I think that this is trying to be fair to a number of people. They probably felt in Dr. Paisley's best interests it was trying to protect him.
He clearly wasn't functioning on all cylinders at the end, and they just wanted to let him go in a way where he was remembered for the positive force that he was. It was a great sadness to a lot of people within the party.
The deposing of Ian Paisley and subsequent replacement by Peter Robinson was not easy for the Paisley family.
I think they assassinated him, and by their words and by their deeds.
Because a reasonable length.
I think they treated him shamefully.
The press will, of course...
There was no love lost between the Baroness and Peter Robinson. I remember at one point in Stormont, and the Baroness, I think, could hardly help herself because she just pointed at Peter Robinson's room and said it was him in there that got rid of my Ian. And whatever side of the argument you come at it from, you could see the anger and the bitterness that was still there.
What encouraged the life that I took? What brought everything to so quick an ending after so much delay? What of the past? What of the present? What of the future? And most important of all, what of the ending?
It was a most remarkable journey. Somebody who came in from the extremes, ended up First Minister of Northern Ireland, and made friends with many would have considered his greatest enemy.
I was growing up at a period where I had no time for Ian Paisley. My father would have ran over him.
New Testament today. Thank you.
I ended up a close friend, amazing as it was.
Throughout the past year, we have enjoyed much support and goodwill from all of the people of Ireland. But we are now entering a new phase. As far as I am concerned, the honeymoon period is over.
I spoke to Martin McGuinness and to Ian Paisley about their relationship. And Ian Paisley said Martin McGuinness never betrayed me. He never gave me his word, then did the opposite.
You may be pleased to know, Awad O'Hin, that it was his desire to visit the Falls Road in 1964 that first wedded my interest in Irish politics.
The day that he was to stand down, myself and Martin went to meet with him, and we brought him a little gift, and we hugged.
You know, when the history books come to be written, will Ian Paisley be written as the firebrand or the peacemaker?
I think ultimately, while Ian did get to the top of the greasy pole, did he smash Sinn Féin? No. Sinn Féin have now overtaken the party that he created. Ian thought in shorter term, tactical to the next election. And we're in the middle of it in this day and age as well. Same thing, same tactics.
Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ.
He was driven first and foremost by his faith. I believe that God used him in the political scene.
Ambition was his saving grace, because it was ambition which led him in the end to share power with Sinn Féin. I mean, he was the one who bit that bullet.
He was a one-off, and never will we ever see a like of Ian Paisley again, either in church or in state.
I think the question that will forever haunt his legacy is the price that Northern Ireland had to pay for him to achieve his ambition. I think whatever that we have to recognise is, in the end, it did take courage for him to sit down with those who've been responsible for killing many of his friends, many of his colleagues. But the important thing is he did say yes.